The first cord of firewood was already gone when I pulled into my driveway at 6:42 in the morning. I sat in my truck for a full 30 seconds with the engine off, staring at the empty space beside my workshop, where 16 stacked cords of seasoned oak and maple had been sitting the night before. The morning light was gray and cold, the kind of November light that makes everything look like a black and white photograph. My coffee was still hot in the cup holder, my hands were still cold from the drive back from the lumber yard, and my firewood was gone. Not scattered, not knocked over by wind or kids or animals. Gone. The entire eastern stack, which had been 8 feet high and 20 feet long, was now a rectangle of bare gravel, with a few scattered pieces of bark and one broken bungee cord that I had not left there. I got out of the truck slowly. The gravel crunched under my boots. The air smelled like cold metal and distant wood smoke from someone else's chimney. I walked to the empty space and stood there, looking at the tire tracks in the mud at the edge of the gravel pad. Dual rear wheels, heavy truck, multiple trips, judging by the depth and overlap of the tracks. Someone had backed a truck up to my woodpile, loaded it, and driven away, more than once. And they had done it recently enough that the mud in the tracks was still dark and wet, not frozen. I pulled out my phone and took 12 pictures before I did anything else. Wide shots of the empty pad, close-ups of the tire tracks with my boot next to them for scale, the broken bungee cord, the remaining wood stacks on the north and south sides of the workshop, still intact, the workshop door, still locked, the security light above the workshop, still on from the night before. Then I called my woodcutter. His name is Dale. He's 63 years old, built like a fire hydrant, and has been cutting, splitting, and delivering firewood in this county for 34 years. He answered on the third ring with the sound of a chainsaw idling in the background. "Dale?" I said. "Did you move any wood from my place this morning?" "No," he said. "Why would I?" "Because the east stack is gone. All of it. 16 cords." There was a long pause. The chainsaw in the background cut off. "Say that again?" 16 cords of seasoned oak and maple. Gone. Tire tracks. Dual rear wheels. Looks like a flatbed or a heavy pickup with a trailer. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, and hung up. I walked the perimeter of my property while I waited. My place is 5 acres on the east side of the subdivision, tucked against a ridge of old-growth pine that the developer never cleared. The house is modest, 2 bedrooms, a big kitchen, a porch that faces the ridge. The workshop is a 40 by 60 steel building I put up 6 years ago, after my wife died, because I needed something to do with my hands that wasn't just sitting in the house listening to the silence. I build custom furniture in there now. Tables, chairs, cabinets, the kind of work that requires patience and sharp tools and a lot of time alone. The firewood stacks were my winter insurance. I heat the workshop with a wood stove, and I sell about half the wood each year to customers who order early and pay in advance. The east stack was already sold. 12 customers had paid deposits totaling just over $4,000 for delivery in late November and early December. The wood was seasoned, split, stacked, and tagged with colored zip ties that Dale and I used to track which cords belonged to which customers. Those zip ties were gone now too. Dale's truck came up the gravel drive at 7:14. He got out with a thermos in one hand and a clipboard in the other, and he walked straight to the empty pad without saying a word. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the tire tracks, then at the remaining stacks, then at me. "Those aren't my tracks," he said. "I know. And those aren't my zip ties on the ground." He pointed at the broken bungee cord. "That's not mine either." "I know." He took a long drink from his thermos. "Someone stole 16 cords of firewood from a guy who builds furniture and minds his own business, in one night, with a heavy truck, and nobody saw anything. Looks that way. You call the sheriff?" "Not yet. I wanted you to see it first." He nodded slowly. "Good, because if we call the sheriff, I want to know exactly what we're reporting. 16 cords is a lot of wood. That's not a couple of guys with a pickup. That's an operation." We spent the next hour documenting everything. Dale measured the tire tracks and identified them as likely belonging to a Ford F-450 or similar heavy-duty flatbed. He counted the remaining stacks and confirmed that only the east stack had been taken. The north and south stacks, another 22 cords combined, were untouched. He checked the zip ties on the remaining stacks and verified that the customer tags were all intact. "Whoever took it knew which stack to hit," Dale said. The east stack was the most accessible, closest to the road, easiest to back a truck up to. They didn't touch the other stacks because those are harder to get to without making noise or leaving more tracks. So they scouted the place. Or they already knew the layout. That thought sat in my stomach like a cold stone. I don't have enemies. I keep to myself. I pay my property taxes on time. I don't go to HOA meetings. I don't have feuds with neighbors. The only people who know the layout of my property are Dale, my customers, and anyone who's ever driven past and paid attention. And the HOA. The HOA knows everything about every property in this subdivision. They have plat maps, satellite images, compliance photos, and a board president named Karen Whitmore, who has made it her personal mission to know what everyone is doing at all times. I don't like Karen Whitmore. I don't like the way she drives through the neighborhood in her white Mercedes SUV at exactly 9 o'clock every morning, slowing down in front of certain houses, taking notes on a clipboard she keeps on the passenger seat. I don't like the way she smiles at people while she's fining them for having the wrong color mulch or a garbage can visible from the street. I don't like the way she talks about community standards, like they're the 10 Commandments, and she's the only one who can read them. But I had no reason to think she'd steal my firewood. Not yet. Dale left at 8:30 to check with his other customers and see if anyone had heard anything about a large wood delivery. I went inside, made a second pot of coffee, and started making phone calls. The first was to my insurance company, just to establish a record. The second was to the sheriff's office, non-emergency line, to file a report. The deputy who took the call said someone would come out later that day or the next morning. The third call was to my neighbor, to the west, a retired school teacher named Margaret, who has lived in the subdivision since it was built in 1987. Margaret knows everything that happens on our street. She sits on her porch with binoculars and a crossword puzzle, and she notices things. "Margaret," I said, "did you see any trucks on the street last night?" "What kind of trucks?" she asked. "Heavy truck. Flatbed or big pickup with a trailer, probably made multiple trips." She was quiet for a moment. "I did see a truck, white flatbed. Had a logo on the door, but I couldn't read it from my porch. It went past around midnight, and then again around 1:30, and then again around 3 o'clock. I thought it was odd, but I figured someone was having work done." "Did you see where it went?" "It turned onto the access road that runs behind the clubhouse. That's all I could see from my angle." "The access road behind the clubhouse?" "That road leads to the HOA maintenance yard, a fenced area where the landscaping crew keeps their equipment, mulch piles, and—" I suddenly remembered, a large covered storage area that Karen Whitmore had been trying to expand at the last board meeting. I thanked Margaret and hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the wall, thinking about white flatbed trucks and access roads and HOA maintenance yards. Before I explain what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. I decided to take a drive. The HOA maintenance yard is at the end of a gravel road that branches off the main subdivision loop. It's surrounded by an 8-foot chain-link fence with privacy slats, and the gate is supposed to be locked at all times. I've only been back there once, 3 years ago, when the board sent a letter saying, my workshop roof was the wrong color, and I needed to appear for an inspection. The inspection turned out to be Karen Whitmore, standing in the maintenance yard with a color swatch, telling me my roof was charcoal, when the covenants required slate gray. I pointed out that charcoal and slate gray are the same color. She fined me $200 anyway. I paid the fine. I repainted the roof. I didn't fight it, because at the time I was still grieving my wife, and I didn't have the energy for a war with the HOA. That was then. I drove past the maintenance yard slowly, not stopping, just looking. The gate was open. That was the first thing I noticed. The gate was wide open, and there was a white flatbed truck parked inside, backed up to the covered storage area. The logo on the door said, Whitmore Property Services. Karen Whitmore's husband, Richard, owns a property services company. Landscaping, snow removal, tree trimming, and, I now realized, firewood delivery. I didn't stop. I didn't take pictures. I just drove past, turned around at the cul-de-sac, and drove home. My heart was beating hard in my chest, but my hands were steady on the wheel. I've learned over the years that anger is a fuel you have to burn carefully. If you let it flare up all at once, you make mistakes. You confront people before you have proof. You say things you can't take back. You give them time to cover their tracks. I wasn't going to make that mistake. Back at home, I pulled out a manila folder from my filing cabinet and wrote Firewood on the tab with a black marker. Inside, I placed the photos from that morning, the insurance claim number, the sheriff's report number, and a handwritten timeline of everything I knew so far. Then I called Dale. "I think I know where the wood went," I said. "Where?" "HOA maintenance yard. White flatbed with Whitmore Property Services on the door." Gate was open. Dale was quiet for a long moment. "Karen Whitmore." "Yeah? You sure?" "Not yet, but I'm going to be." "What's your plan?" "I'm going to let her tell me." Dale made a sound that was half laugh, half cough. "You're going to let Karen Whitmore incriminate herself. She likes to talk. She likes to explain things. She likes to tell people how things work. I'm going to give her the opportunity. And if she doesn't, then I'll find another way, but I'm not confronting her until I have everything I need." I hung up and made another note in the folder. Then I waited. The sheriff's deputy arrived at 2:15 that afternoon. His name was Deputy Collins, a young guy with a calm demeanor and a notebook that he wrote in very slowly. I showed him the empty pad, the tire tracks, the broken bungee cord. I told him about Margaret seeing the white flatbed, about the open gate at the maintenance yard, about the Whitmore Property Services truck. I gave him copies of my photos and my timeline. He listened carefully, wrote everything down, and then said, "I'll go talk to Mrs. Whitmore. See what she has to say." "I'd appreciate that," I said. "You're not going to confront her yourself?" "Not yet." He nodded like he understood. Smart. People like that, they'll talk themselves into a corner if you let them. Deputy Collins left, and I went back to my workshop. I had a cherry dining table to finish, and working with my hands helps me think. I spent the next 3 hours planing, sanding, and fitting joints while my mind turned over the problem like a puzzle box. If Karen Whitmore had taken my firewood, she hadn't done it on a whim. She'd planned it. She'd scouted the property, identified the most accessible stack, brought a truck and probably a crew, and moved 16 cords of wood in the middle of the night. That was a lot of effort for firewood. There had to be a reason. And then I remembered the flyer. 2 weeks earlier, I'd found a flyer in my mailbox. Not mailed, just placed there, which was technically against postal regulations, but nobody enforced that kind of thing. The flyer was printed on heavy cream-colored paper with the HOA logo at the top. It said, "Community Warmth Drive, helping our neighbors stay warm this winter." The Whitmore Hills HOA is proud to announce our annual Community Warmth Drive. We will be collecting and distributing firewood to residents in need throughout the subdivision. If you have excess wood or would like to volunteer, please contact the HOA office. Together, we can ensure that no one in our community goes cold this winter. I'd read it, thought it was a nice idea, and thrown it away. I had my own customers to worry about. I didn't have excess wood to donate. But now I wondered, had Karen Whitmore decided that my wood was excess? Had she decided that my east stack, the one closest to the road, was fair game for her charity drive? I went back into the house and dug through the recycling bin until I found the flyer. It was crumpled and stained with coffee, but the text was still readable. I smoothed it out and added it to the folder. Then I went online and started searching. The Whitmore Hills HOA has a website. It's not a good website. It looks like it was built in 2005 and never updated. But it has a community news section where the board posts announcements, meeting minutes, and photos from HOA events. I scrolled through the posts until I found one from 3 days ago, titled Community Warmth Drive Update. The post was written by Karen Whitmore herself. It said, "We are thrilled to announce that the Community Warmth Drive has received an incredibly generous donation of seasoned firewood from one of our own residents. This wood will be distributed to families in need throughout Whitmore Hills, ensuring that everyone has access to warmth this winter. Distribution will begin this Saturday at the clubhouse parking lot from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. If you or someone you know needs assistance, please come by. Delivery is available for a small fee to cover transportation costs." I read that last sentence 3 times. Delivery is available for a small fee to cover transportation costs. She was charging people for delivery. She was charging people to deliver my firewood. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. The anger that had been simmering all day finally found its focus. This wasn't just theft, this was fraud. She had stolen 16 cords of wood that I had already sold to paying customers, and she was going to distribute it to the community as a donation, while charging delivery fees that went straight into her husband's business. I printed the web page. I printed the flyer. I printed everything I could find about the Community Warmth Drive. Then I added it all to the folder. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office. I've been to the recorder's office exactly twice in my life. Once when I bought the property, and once when I refinanced after my wife died. It's a quiet building with fluorescent lights and the smell of old paper and toner. The clerks are helpful if you're polite and patient, which I am. I asked for copies of everything related to my parcel, the deed, the plat map, any recorded easements, any HOA covenants, any amendments, any liens. The clerk, a woman named Shirley who had been working there for 30 years, pulled the files without comment and started making copies. "You're the second person from Whitmore Hills this week," she said as the copier hummed. "Who was the first?" "Karen Whitmore. She came in on Monday, asking about community property designations. Wanted to know if the maintenance yard was recorded as a common area or if it was still under the developer's name." My heart rate ticked up. "What did you tell her?" "I told her the maintenance yard is still under the developer's name. The HOA never purchased it. They have a lease agreement, but it expired in 2019 and was never renewed." I stared at her. "The HOA doesn't own the maintenance yard?" "Nope. They've been operating on an expired lease for almost 5 years. The developer hasn't done anything about it because he's been tied up in litigation in Florida. But technically, the HOA has no legal right to use that property." I added that information to my mental file. It wasn't directly related to the firewood, but it was a crack in Karen Whitmore's armor, a big one. Shirley handed me a thick stack of copies. "That'll be $47. I paid in cash, thanked her, and drove home with the copies on the passenger seat. That afternoon, I called my 12 customers. One by one, I explained that there had been a theft and that their firewood deliveries would be delayed. Most of them were understanding. A few were frustrated. One, a woman named Elaine, who had ordered 3 cords for her elderly mother, started crying. "My mom's furnace broke last month," she said. "She's been using a wood stove for heat. I don't know what she's going to do if the wood doesn't come." "I'll figure something out," I said. "I promise." I hung up and stared at the folder on my kitchen table. The folder that now contained photos, a police report, a flyer, a website printout, and $47 worth of county records. The folder that was slowly becoming a weapon. But I still didn't have proof that Karen Whitmore had taken my wood. I had suspicion. I had circumstantial evidence. I had a white flatbed truck and an open gate and a flyer about a charity drive. But I didn't have anything that directly connected her to the theft. I needed more. On Friday morning, 2 days after the theft, I drove to the clubhouse. The Community Warmth Drive distribution was scheduled for the next day, but I wanted to see the setup. I wanted to see the wood. I wanted to see if I could identify my own cords before they were handed out to the neighborhood. The clubhouse parking lot was busy. Volunteers were setting up folding tables and hanging banners that said, "Whitmore Hills Community Warmth Drive," in cheerful red letters. A large flatbed trailer was parked at the edge of the lot, loaded with firewood. My firewood. I recognized it immediately. The oak and maple were mixed in a specific ratio that Dale and I used for our seasoned cords, about 60% oak for long-burning heat, 40% maple for easy lighting. The pieces were cut to 16-inch lengths, which is our standard, and the wood had the distinctive gray-brown weathering of wood that had been seasoned for at least a year under cover. But the thing that confirmed it beyond any doubt was the zip ties. Dale and I used colored zip ties to mark our cords for different customers. Blue for the Johnson order, red for the Martinez order, yellow for the Henderson order, green for the Patterson order. Each zip tie is attached to a specific piece of wood in each cord, and the color corresponds to a customer name on Dale's clipboard. And there, on the flatbed trailer, mixed in with the wood that Karen Whitmore was about to distribute as charity, were pieces of wood with blue, red, yellow, and green zip ties still attached. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't say a word. I just took pictures, dozens of them, from different angles, making sure to capture the zip ties, the wood, the trailer, the banners, and Karen Whitmore herself, who was standing near the folding tables, with a clipboard and a self-satisfied smile. Then I called Dale. "I found the wood," I said. "Where?" "Clubhouse parking lot, loaded on a trailer for the Community Warmth Drive. Our zip ties are still on it." Dale was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You want me to come down there?" "Not yet. I want you to bring your clipboard tomorrow morning, the one with the customer list and the zip tie colors. You're going to confront her at the distribution. I'm going to let her distribute the wood, and then I'm going to ask her for a donation receipt." Dale laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You're evil." "I'm patient," I said. "There's a difference." Saturday morning was cold and clear. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees overnight, and there was frost on the grass and a thin skin of ice on the puddles in the driveway. I dressed warmly, jeans, boots, a heavy Carhartt jacket, and a wool cap, and I put the folder in a canvas bag that I could carry over my shoulder. Dale arrived at 8:30 with his clipboard and a thermos of coffee. He was wearing his work coat, the one with the ripped pocket and the burn mark on the sleeve from a chainsaw mishap 10 years ago. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who had spent his life working with wood and didn't have time for nonsense. "You ready?" he asked. "Ready." We drove to the clubhouse in Dale's truck. The parking lot was already filling up with residents. Families with minivans, elderly couples in sedans, young people in hatchbacks. Some of them looked embarrassed to be there. Some looked grateful. Some looked like they were just there for the free stuff. Karen Whitmore was in the center of it all, wearing a red vest over a cream-colored sweater, her hair perfectly styled, her clipboard in hand. She was directing volunteers, greeting residents, and posing for photos, with a smile that looked practiced and political. Her husband Richard was there too, standing next to the flatbed trailer with a stack of delivery fee envelopes and a cash box. I watched from the edge of the parking lot for about 20 minutes. I watched residents approach the table, fill out forms, and receive their wood. I watched some of them hand over cash for delivery fees. I watched Richard Whitmore pocket the money and write receipts on a pad that said, "Whitmore Property Services" at the top. And I watched the wood, my wood, get loaded into the backs of minivans and pickup trucks and trailers, piece by piece, cord by cord. At 9:45, I walked over to the table. Karen Whitmore saw me coming. Her smile flickered for just a moment, a tiny crack in the polished surface. And then it was back, brighter than before. "Good morning," she said. "Are you here for the warmth drive?" "I'm here about the firewood," I said. "Wonderful. We've had such a generous response from the community. Are you picking up, or do you need delivery?" "Neither. I'm here because someone stole 16 cords of firewood from my property on Tuesday night, and I believe some of that wood is on your trailer." Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes changed. They got harder, sharper, like a hawk spotting movement in the grass. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't know what you're talking about. All of this wood was donated by community members for the warmth drive." "Who donated it?" "I'm not at liberty to disclose donor information, privacy concerns." "I see." I pulled out my phone and showed her one of the photos I'd taken the day before. "Do you see these colored zip ties on the wood? Blue, red, yellow, green. Those are my zip ties. My woodcutter and I use them to mark cords for specific customers." Karen glanced at the photo, then back at me. "Anyone can buy colored zip ties." "They can, but they can't buy the customer list that matches those colors." I nodded at Dale, who was standing a few feet behind me. "Dale has the list. Blue is the Johnson order. Red is Martinez. Yellow is Henderson. Green is Patterson. All 12 of my customers paid deposits for wood that was supposed to be delivered next week. Wood that was stacked beside my workshop on Tuesday night and gone by Wednesday morning." Karen's smile finally faded. "I don't know anything about that. This wood came from HOA-maintained trees on common property." "Really?" I said. "Which common property?" "The wooded area behind the maintenance yard." "The maintenance yard that the HOA doesn't own?" Her face went very still. "What did you say?" I said the maintenance yard that the HOA doesn't own. The lease expired in 2019. The property is still under the developer's name. You've been operating on an expired lease for almost 5 years. A few of the nearby volunteers had stopped what they were doing and were listening now. Richard Whitmore had put down his cash box and was walking toward us with a frown on his face. "That's not true," Karen said, but her voice had lost some of its confidence. "It's in the county records," I said. "I checked. You can check too if you want. But that's not really the point right now. The point is the firewood. The point is that you took 16 cords of wood from my property, wood that I had already sold to paying customers, and you're distributing it as a donation, while your husband charges delivery fees. That's a serious accusation, Richard said, stepping up beside his wife. You'd better have proof. I do. I reached into my canvas bag and pulled out the folder. I have photos of the empty wood pad. I have photos of the tire tracks matching a heavy-duty flatbed. I have a witness who saw a white flatbed truck with Whitmore Property Services on the door, making multiple trips on the access road behind the clubhouse on Tuesday night. I have photos of your truck in the maintenance yard with the gate open. I have photos of this trailer loaded with wood that has my zip ties on it. And I have a sheriff's report that was filed on Wednesday morning, before I even knew the wood was here. I opened the folder and spread the contents across the folding table. Photos, printouts, the police report, the county records, the flyer for the community warmth drive, the website printout with the line about delivery fees. And here's what I think happened, I said, loud enough for the growing crowd of residents to hear. I think you decided that my firewood would make a nice donation for your charity drive. I think you sent your husband and his crew to take it in the middle of the night, thinking I wouldn't notice until it was too late. I think you planned to distribute it, collect delivery fees, and pocket the money. And I think you assumed I wouldn't fight back because I've never fought back before. Karen Whitmore's face had gone pale. Her clipboard was trembling slightly in her hands. The crowd of residents had grown to about 30 people, and they were all watching, waiting, murmuring to each other. This is ridiculous, Karen said. You have no proof that we took your wood. Those photos could be of anything. Those zip ties could be from anywhere. Then let's call Deputy Collins, I said. He took my report on Wednesday. He came out here to talk to you on Thursday. I'm sure he'd be interested to see the wood on this trailer and compare it to the photos in my report. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, and opened it again. No sound came out. Richard stepped forward. Look, he said, his voice lower now, more conciliatory. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe some of the wood got mixed up. We can work this out. I agree, I said. We can work this out. Here's how. You're going to stop distributing my wood. You're going to return whatever hasn't been given away yet. You're going to reimburse me for the wood that's already been distributed. 16 cords at $300 per cord, which is the market rate for seasoned oak and maple in this county. That's $4,800. And you're going to refund every delivery fee you've collected today, because those fees were charged for stolen property. That's outrageous, Karen said. We're not paying you anything. This is a charity event. It's not a charity event, I said. It's a fraud. You stole wood that I had already sold to customers who need it for heat this winter. One of those customers is an elderly woman whose furnace is broken. She's been crying on the phone because she doesn't know how she's going to stay warm. And you're standing here in your red vest, smiling for photos, collecting cash for wood you stole. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. I saw people looking at Karen with new expressions. Not admiration, not respect, but something closer to disgust. A woman near the front of the crowd spoke up. Is that true? Did you take his wood? Of course not, Karen said, but her voice was thin and reedy. Then why does his wood have his zip ties on it? The woman asked. I saw them. Blue, red, yellow, green, just like he said. Another voice. I paid a $20 delivery fee. Are you telling me I paid for stolen wood? And another. My mother-in-law is on a fixed income. She gave you $30 for delivery. You'd better not be running a scam. Karen looked around at the faces of her neighbors, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked afraid. Not angry, not defensive. Afraid. Richard grabbed her arm. We need to go, he said quietly. We can't just leave, she hissed. We can, and we will. This is getting out of hand. But before they could move, a sheriff's cruiser pulled into the parking lot. Deputy Collins got out, walked over to the table, and looked at the photos spread across it, then at the trailer loaded with wood, then at Karen and Richard Whitmore. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, I think we need to have another conversation. The next hour was chaos. Deputy Collins asked questions, residents asked questions. Karen Whitmore tried to explain, then tried to deflect, then tried to leave, and finally just stood there with her arms crossed and her mouth pressed into a thin line, while her husband did all the talking. Richard Whitmore's story changed 3 times. First, he said the wood came from a donor who wished to remain anonymous. Then he said it came from HOA maintained trees on common property. Then, when Deputy Collins pointed out that the HOA didn't own any common property with trees large enough to produce 16 cords of seasoned oak and maple. He said there must have been a mix-up with a different wood delivery. A mix-up, Deputy Collins repeated. You accidentally took 16 cords of wood from a private residence, loaded it onto your truck, and brought it here for a charity event. It could have happened, Richard said weakly. It didn't, I said. I have photos of the tire tracks. I have a witness who saw the truck, I have the zip ties, and I have this. I pulled out the final piece of evidence, a printed email from my insurance company, confirming that they had opened an investigation into the theft and would be contacting the HOA's insurance provider to discuss liability. My insurance company is very interested in this, I said. They're also interested in the fact that the HOA has been operating on an expired lease for the maintenance yard. That could affect their coverage for a lot of things. Karen Whitmore's face went from pale to gray. Deputy Collins took statements from me, from Dale, from 3 residents who had paid delivery fees, and from Margaret, who had arrived after someone called her and told her what was happening. He took photos of the wood on the trailer, the zip ties, the delivery fee envelopes, and the cash box. Then he told Karen and Richard Whitmore that they were free to go for now, but that the investigation was ongoing and they should expect follow-up questions. And I'd recommend you stop distributing this wood, he added, until we can determine who it actually belongs to. Karen didn't say anything. She just turned and walked to her white Mercedes SUV, got in, and drove away. Richard followed a moment later in the flatbed truck, leaving the trailer full of wood behind. The residents who had gathered for the warmth drive were still standing in the parking lot, looking confused and upset. Some of them had come because they genuinely needed help. Some of them had already paid delivery fees. Some of them had already loaded wood into their vehicles and didn't know if they should keep it or return it. I stood on the flatbed trailer and raised my voice so everyone could hear. Listen, I said, I know some of you came here because you need firewood. I know some of you paid money for delivery. I know this situation is a mess. Here's what I'm going to do. I pointed at Dale. This is Dale. He's been cutting and delivering firewood in this county for 34 years. He has a list of legitimate charities that provide firewood assistance to families in need. Real charities, with real paperwork and real accountability. If you need help, talk to Dale. He'll get you connected with the right people. Dale nodded and held up his clipboard. I've got the list right here. No delivery fees, no scams, just help. I continued. As for the wood that's already been distributed, keep it. I'm not going to ask people who need heat to give back firewood in November. That's not who I am. But I am going to ask Karen Whitmore and the HOA board to reimburse me for every cord that was taken. And I'm going to ask them to refund every delivery fee that was collected today. A man near the back of the crowd called out, "What if they refuse?" Then I'll see them in court, I said, and I'll bring the folder. I held up the manila folder, thick with paper and photos and records. This folder has everything. Photos, witness statements, county records, insurance documents, the flyer for this event, the website printout, the delivery fee receipts. Everything Karen Whitmore did, she did on paper. She wrote it down, she posted it online, she collected cash and gave receipts. She created a trail. I looked around at the faces in the crowd. Some of them were nodding. Some of them were smiling. Some of them looked like they were rethinking everything they'd ever believed about the HOA. People like Karen Whitmore think authority comes from being loud, I said. They think a clipboard and a title and a white SUV make them untouchable. But paper remembers what people try to forget. And I've got the paper. The crowd dispersed slowly. Some people stayed to talk to Dale about the charity list. Some people came up to me and apologized for taking the wood, even though they hadn't known it was stolen. A few people asked if they could help with the case against the HOA. Margaret, my neighbor, was one of the last to leave. She walked up to me with her binoculars hanging around her neck and her crossword puzzle folded in her coat pocket. I've been waiting for someone to stand up to that woman for 20 years, she said. I'm glad it was you. I'm not done yet, I said. Good, she said. Don't be. The following week was a whirlwind of paperwork, phone calls, and meetings. Deputy Collins completed his investigation and forwarded his findings to the county prosecutor's office. The prosecutor declined to file criminal charges. Theft of firewood is hard to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, especially when the defendant claims it was a mix-up. but the report was damning enough to be useful in civil court. My insurance company contacted the HOA's insurance provider and informed them that they were pursuing a claim for the stolen wood. The HOA's provider, upon learning that the HOA had been operating on an expired lease for the maintenance yard, informed the board that their coverage might be void for any claims related to that property. The board, in a panic, called an emergency meeting. I attended that meeting. So did about 40 other residents, which was more than had ever attended an HOA meeting in the history of Whitmore Hills. The board members sat at a long table at the front of the clubhouse, looking uncomfortable and defensive. Karen Whitmore was not at the table. She had resigned as board president 2 days after the warmth drive, citing personal reasons. The new interim president, a retired accountant named Harold, opened the meeting by acknowledging that the board had made some mistakes and that they were committed to transparency and accountability moving forward. I stood up during the public comment period and walked to the front of the room with my folder. "I have a few things to say," I said. Harold nodded nervously. "Go ahead." "First, I want to thank the residents who came forward with information about the firewood theft. Your statements helped build the case. Second, I want to inform the board that I've filed a civil claim against Karen Whitmore, Richard Whitmore, and Whitmore Property Services for the value of the stolen wood, $4,800, plus damages for the delay in delivering to my customers. Third, I want to inform the board that my insurance company is pursuing a separate claim against the HOA's insurance for liability in the theft." Harold's face went pale. "We weren't aware of that. You are now. Fourth, I want to inform the board that the county recorder's office has confirmed that the HOA's lease on the maintenance yard expired in 2019 and was never renewed. That means the HOA has been trespassing on private property for almost 5 years. The developer has been notified, and he's not happy." A murmur ran through the room. Several board members exchanged panicked looks. "Fifth," I said, "I want to inform the board that I've reviewed the HOA's financial records for the past 3 years. They're public record, by the way, for any resident who wants to see them. And I've found multiple discrepancies related to the Community Warmth Drive and other charity events organized by Karen Whitmore. It appears that delivery fees and donations were being funneled through Whitmore Property Services without proper accounting or board approval." I pulled a stack of printed spreadsheets from my folder and placed them on the table in front of Harold. "I'm not an accountant," I said, "but I know someone who is. She's going to be reviewing these records in detail. If she finds evidence of fraud or embezzlement, I'll be forwarding that information to the county prosecutor and the state attorney general's office." Harold stared at the spreadsheets like they were a live grenade. "We had no idea," he said. "I believe you," I said. Karen Whitmore was very good at keeping secrets, but secrets have a way of coming out when you start looking at the paper. I turned to face the residents in the audience. "I'm not here to destroy the HOA. I'm here to make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. I'm here to make sure that the people who need help actually get it, instead of being exploited by someone who sees charity as a business opportunity. And I'm here to make sure that Karen Whitmore and anyone like her understands that this community is not for sale." There was applause. Not polite, restrained applause, but real, loud, sustained applause. People were standing up. Margaret was clapping with her binoculars bouncing against her chest. Dale was in the back of the room, grinning like he'd just split a perfect cord of oak. I walked back to my seat and sat down. The folder was still in my hands, thick and heavy and full of paper. The meeting continued for another hour. The board voted to commission an independent audit of the HOA's finances. They voted to terminate the expired lease on the maintenance yard and negotiate a new agreement with the developer. They voted to dissolve the Community Warmth Drive and redirect all charitable efforts through established nonprofit organizations with proper oversight. And they voted to issue a formal apology to me and to the residents who had been misled by Karen Whitmore's scheme. It wasn't a perfect ending. Karen Whitmore was never criminally charged. The civil case dragged on for months before she finally agreed to a settlement. She paid me $4,800 for the wood, plus another $2,000 for my customers' delays and my legal expenses. Richard Whitmore's business took a hit when several HOA contracts were canceled, but he was still operating, still driving his white flatbed truck, still finding ways to make money. But Karen Whitmore never ran another HOA meeting. She never organized another charity drive. She never drove through the neighborhood in her white Mercedes SUV with her clipboard on the passenger seat. She sold her house 6 months later and moved to a different county, where presumably she's bothering a different set of neighbors. The real victory wasn't the money. It wasn't even the exposure of the fraud. The real victory was the look on Karen Whitmore's face when she realized that the quiet man with the folder had been paying attention the whole time. The look when she understood that her clipboard and her title and her polished smile weren't enough to protect her from the truth. People like that mistake silence for fear. They think if you're not shouting, you're not fighting. They don't understand that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is write everything down and wait. I still have the folder. It's in my filing cabinet, next to the deed to my property and the insurance policy for the workshop. I don't look at it often, but I like knowing it's there. A record of what happened. A reminder that paper is patient, and paper remembers, and paper doesn't lie. Dale and I delivered the replacement wood to my customers in early December. Elaine's mother got her 3 cords, and her furnace got fixed a week later thanks to a charity that Dale connected her with. A real charity, with real paperwork and real accountability. The other customers got their wood too. A little late, but no worse for the wait. On Christmas Eve, I built a fire in the wood stove in my workshop. I used oak from the north stack, the stack that Karen Whitmore hadn't touched. The fire burned hot and clean, and the workshop filled with the smell of seasoned wood and sawdust and varnish. I sat in my old chair, the one with the ripped cushion and the coffee stain on the arm, and I watched the flames through the glass door of the stove. Outside, the subdivision was quiet. The Christmas lights were on in most of the houses. The access road behind the clubhouse was dark. The maintenance yard gate was locked, properly locked, with a new padlock that the board had installed after the lease was renegotiated. I thought about my wife. She would have liked this. She would have liked the fire, and the workshop, and the quiet. She would have liked that I finally stood up for myself. She was always telling me that I let people walk all over me, that I needed to be more assertive, that I needed to fight back when someone pushed me. I think she would have been proud. The fire crackled and popped. The wind moved through the pine trees on the ridge. The workshop was warm, and the woodpile outside was full, and the folder was in the cabinet where it belonged. Some people think authority comes from being loud. Some people think power comes from a title or a clipboard or a white SUV. But real ownership is quieter than that. Real ownership is a deed in a drawer and a stack of wood by the workshop, and the knowledge that you've earned what you have, and no one can take it from you without a fight. I sat in my chair and watched the fire burn, and I didn't think about Karen Whitmore at all.